Hello, and welcome to the presentation of the Quarter 1 2022 Labour Force Survey, or LFS, results. My name is Sam Scriven, and I am the statistician in the CSO's Labour Market and Earnings Division with responsibility for compiling the LFS results. Before getting into the results for Quarter 1, let me start with a brief introduction. The Labour Force Survey is a continuous household survey carried out by the Central Statistics Office and is the official source of employment and unemployment estimates for Ireland. The official labour market classification of respondents to the Labour Force Survey is based on International Labour Organization, or ILO, concepts and definitions. And you can find further information about the survey from the links provided in the annex at the end of this presentation. Users should note that the COVID-19 adjusted measures of employment and unemployment, which have been published by the CSO in parallel with the standard ILO labour market estimates since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, do not appear in today's results. With the Pandemic Unemployment Payment, or PUP scheme, ending on the 25th of March of this year, COVID-19 adjusted measures of employment and unemployment in the LFS have been discontinued, since the number of persons in receipt of the PUP at the end of the reference period is 0. The published infographic shown in this slide presents selected LFS results for Quarter 1 2022, along with the corresponding estimates for Quarter 1 in both 2020 and 2021. Using the standard ILO criteria, the estimated number of persons aged 15 to 89 years in employment in Quarter 1 2022 stood at just under 2,506,000, up by 275,000 or 12% when compared to a year earlier when the country remained under tight COVID-19 restrictions. The figure is up by almost 160,000 or 7% when compared to Quarter 1 2020 when COVID-19 restrictions began to impact the labour market in Ireland. Looking along the bottom of the infographic and the number of persons who were classified as in employment but who were absent from work during the reference week during Quarter 1, meaning that they were temporarily absent from work for reasons such as holidays, sick leave or maternity leave, was just over 168,000 or 6.7% of those employed, 45% lower than during the lockdown of Quarter 1 2021 and almost 20% lower than in Quarter 1 2020. Note that this figure would have included many workers who were laid off as businesses were forced to close during COVID-19 lockdowns. With greater numbers in employment and fewer people absent from work during the reference week, the estimated number of hours worked per week stood at a record 80.8 million hours per week in Quarter 1, up by 12.1 million hours per week, or 18% compared to a year earlier, and up by 4.5 million hours per week, or 6% compared to Quarter 1 2020. The trend in labour market status estimates over a 10-year period in 2-year intervals is shown in the slide here, the purpose of which is to show the underlying medium-term trend with much of the COVID-19 associated volatility of the last 2 years removed. The number of persons in employment, shown in the navy-coloured bars, has grown steadily over the 10-year period, with almost 650,000 more people in employment compared with Quarter 1 2012. The number of persons classified as unemployed, shown in the orange bars, is considerably lower now than at the beginning of the series shown, although higher than it was in Quarter 1 2020. The number of persons outside the labour force, shown in the green bars, decreased in Quarter 1 2022, which was the first such decrease in the series presented in this chart. It should be noted that the overall height of each bar reflects the estimated population aged 15 and over for that quarter. Turning attention next to the employment estimates for Quarter 1. And using the standard ILO definitions, the estimated number of persons aged 15 to 89 years in employment in Quarter 1 2022 stood at 2,505,800, down by just 200 from the estimate for Quarter 4 2021. The unadjusted employment rate for persons aged 15 to 64 years in Quarter 1 was 72.8%, 0.2 percentage points lower than in Quarter 4 2021. The number of persons in employment was up 12.3% from 2,230,000 over the year, while the employment rate was up from 65.6% in Q1 2021. The seasonally adjusted estimate for the number of persons in employment is just over 2,530,000, up 1.4% in the quarter. The seasonally adjusted series for persons in employment over the last 4 years for males and for females is shown in the slide here. There has been consistent growth in employment volume over the recent quarters, in spite of the sharp COVID-19 related decline in employment volume seen in Q2 2020. Current levels of employment for both males and females have recovered to levels well beyond those seen before the onset of the pandemic. The seasonally adjusted series indicates that the number of females in employment in Q1 was 1.3% higher than in the previous quarter at 1.18 million, while the number of males in employment was 0.9% higher at 1.34 million. The slide here shows the changes in employment volume for males and for females over the last 2 years since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in Q1 2020. The number of males in employment has increased by 63,000 or 5%, while the number of females in employment has increased by 95,000, almost 9%. The chart in this slide shows the change in employment rate by sex and age group between Q1 2020 and Q1 2022. Youth employment, that is persons aged 15 to 24 years in employment, has shown a considerable increase over this period, up by 6.4 percentage points and 7 percentage points for males and females respectively. In volume terms, youth employment increased by just over 50,000, almost 20%, between Q1 2020 and Q1 2022. By economic sector, the largest increase in youth employment was in the accommodation and food service activity sector and in the wholesale and retail trade sector. The current rate of employment among persons aged 15 to 24 years is 47.7%. Employment rates for females rose among all age groups in the period between Q1 2020 and Q1 2022. There were increases in female employment rates for age categories between 25 and 54, contrasting with male employment rates, which remained more stable over the period. The rate of employment among females aged 25 to 34, 35 to 44, and 45 to 54 all rose by between 2.5 and 5.2 percentage points. The employment rate among 55 to 64-year-olds increased by around 4% for both males and females. The increase in female workers between the age of 25 and 54, shown in the previous slide between Q1 2020 and Q1 2022, amounted to almost 50,000. Looking at principal economic status, which measures the respondents' own assessment of their economic status, for females by age category, we can see approximately the same increase in persons classifying themselves as primarily employed, with a similar decrease in females who classified themselves as principally carrying out home duties. The largest shift here was among females aged 35 to 44 years, as shown in the chart. While overall employment volume remained virtually unchanged over the quarter, there was an increase of almost 20,000 persons working full-time, with a corresponding decrease in those working part-time. The chart in this slide shows the change in the proportion of those in employment who were working full-time rather than part-time. Between Q1 2020 and Q1 2022, among younger workers, there has been a decrease in the share who were working full-time compared to 2 years ago, down 1.4 percentage points for males and down 3.6 percentage points for females. In contrast, there is now a higher share of females aged 25 to 34 and aged 55 to 64 who are working full-time compared to Q1 2020. Turning now to the employment volume in the different economic sectors, and having dropped off in most quarters in the year to Q1 2021, there has been a recovery across most sectors in the year to Q1 2022. The chart in this slide shows the number of persons in employment by NACE sector for Q1 2020 and 2022. Employment volumes are higher now in most sectors than they were in Q1 2020. Most notably in the information and communications sector, which was 28% or 36,000 higher in Q1 2022 when compared to Q1 2020, almost completely driven by increases in computer programming, consultancy and related activities. and in the human health and social work activities sector, which was up 13% or 36,000 when compared to Q1 2020. Some sectors have not yet fully recovered from the pandemic effects, and the most notable of these are the administrative and support services activities sector, which was 8% or 9,400 less than it was in Q1 2020, driven by falls in employment in security and investigation activities and in services to buildings and landscape activities, and in the accommodation and food service activities sector, which remained down by 4% or 6,900 compared to Q1 2020. The table on this slide presents absences from work during the reference week for each economic sector as a percentage share of total employment in that sector, again for Q1 2020 and for Q1 2022. In Q1 2020, the overall absence rate was 8.9%, and having increased sharply during the height of the pandemic, had decreased down to 6.7% in Q1 2022. The decrease in absences between Q1 20 and Q1 2022 was observed across most NACE sectors, with the exception of human health and social work activities sector. The sector with the highest levels of absence from work in the reference week during Q1 22 was the human health and social work activities sector, at 11.3% of total employment for that sector. As highlighted earlier, the total number of hours per week stood at a record 80.8 million hours per week during Q1, up by 4.5 million hours per week compared to Q1 20. The bar chart on this slide compares the number of hours worked per week expressed in millions by NACE sector, and again we've chosen to compare Q1 20 and Q1 22 in this slide. The sectors with the highest increases in terms of hours worked were the information and communications sector and in industry, up by 1.3 million and 0.8 million hours per week respectively, while the largest decrease was observed in the wholesale and retail trade sector, down by 0.4 million hours per week. Turning now to unemployment, and again using the standard ILO criteria, the number of persons aged 15 to 74 years who were unemployed in Q4 stood at 126,700, with an associated unemployment rate for those aged 15 to 74 of 4.8%. The number unemployed was down by 43,800 when compared to Q1 21, but higher by 12,000 than in Q1 20, when the unemployment rate stood at 4.7%. The seasonally adjusted estimate for the number unemployed is 131,700, down by 4,500 on the previous quarter. The seasonally adjusted unemployment rate in Q1 was 5%. The chart in this slide shows the seasonally adjusted unemployment rate for males, females, and for all persons aged 15 to 74 over the last 4 years. The seasonally adjusted unemployment rate in Q4 21 at 5% has fallen from the levels seen during the height of the pandemic, but remains marginally higher than the rate of 4.9% in Q1 20. The youth unemployment rate among those aged 15 to 24 years stood at 7.5% in Q1 22, down from 15.6% in Q1 21. In Q1, 43,700 persons were classified as long-term unemployed, that is persons unemployed for 12 months or longer, and this accounted for 34.5% of all unemployed persons. The long-term unemployment rate for persons aged 15 to 74 stood at 1.7% in Q1. Turning attention to the labour force results, and the ILO-defined labour force, comprised of all persons aged 15 and over who are classified as employed or unemployed, was estimated to be just over 2.62 million in Q1, with an associated participation rate of 64.8%. The seasonally adjusted participation rate stood at 65.2%. Those not in the labour force was just over 1.43 million. The chart in this slide shows the seasonally adjusted participation rates for males, females, and for all persons aged 15 and over a 4-year period, and shows the decline in participation rate which coincided with when COVID-19 restrictions most impacted the labour market in Q2 20. The chart also shows that participation rates by Q1 2022 have now surpassed pre-pandemic levels. This is particularly the case among females, where the current participation rate, 59.9%, is 3.5 percentage points higher than in Q1 20. The corresponding value for males at 70.8% in Q1 2022 is also higher now than in Q1 20 by 1.7 percentage points. The number of females in the labour force has increased by just over 100,000 or 9% between Q1 20 and Q1 22, while the number of males in the labour force at almost 1.4 million is up by 68,000. The corresponding participation rates shown in the chart here increased from 56.1% to 59.6% for females and from 68.5% to 70.2% for males. The chart in this slide looks at the participation rate by age group and shows that there has been growth in labour market participation among all age categories since Q1 20. The highest percentage gains are among 15 to 24-year-olds, where participation increased from 45.8% to 51.5%, an increase of 5.7 percentage points. The chart in this slide compares labour market participation rates in different regions. Again, we see growth relative to Q1 20 across all regions, with the highest increases seen in the Midlands region with an increase of 5.4 percentage points and in the Border region with an increase of 3 percentage points to 60.9%. Focusing briefly on the annual change in participation, the number of persons in the labour force in Q1 22 was up by 9.6% or 231,400 from a year earlier, and the participation rate increased from 60% to 64.8% over the year. In terms of decomposing the change in the labour force, there was a positive demographic effect of 26,600 and a positive participation effect of 204,800. Meanwhile, on a seasonally adjusted basis, the labour force increased by 23,900 or 0.9% over the quarter to just over 2.65 million in Q1 22. In summary, using the standard ILO criteria, the estimated number of persons aged 15 to 89 years in employment in Q1 2022 stood at just under 2,506,000, marginally down on Q4 2021. The number of persons who were classified as in employment but who were away from work during the reference week during Q1 was just over 168,000 or 6.7% of those employed, 45% lower than during the lockdown of Q1 21 and almost 20% lower than in Q1 2020. The estimate for the number of actual hours worked per week stood at a record 80.8 million hours per week in Q1, up by 12.1 million hours per week, or 18% compared to a year earlier, and up by 4.5 million hours per week, or 6% compared to Q1 2020. Labour force survey data for Q1 was collected by a combination of telephone and face-to-face interviews carried out by CSO household survey interviewers. CSO household surveys give us a picture of the economic and social situation of the citizens of Ireland in a way and with a level of accuracy that no one else can gain. If you are asked to take part in a CSO survey, please do so. It means that when CSO figures are quoted, you know they're accurate because you told us. And that concludes this results presentation for the Labour Force Survey for Q1 2022. Thank you for watching.